I think we're live. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time here to make sure things are set up on my end. Wait a few minutes to make sure people can join if they get the chance. But at least wanted to say hello in case there's anyone there as soon as I started. I'm going to be trying, excuse me, I'm going to be trying something new with chat. So hopefully this works out how I'm expecting, how I'm hoping. I guess we shall see. There we go. Hey, Tiff, how's it going? Oh, it looks like chat's working, maybe. I'm trying something new where I have chat in a window by itself, and I think it's working. I just want to make sure it doesn't like lose connection or something. I would hate to miss something that people are saying. So I'll probably try to keep both open as long as I can and just alternate between them. Doing well, very sleepy. Yeah, I get that, you know. It is 9 o'clock at night. It's a little late for some people. I absolutely understand that. Just, you know, with the typical things that I have to do throughout the day, this time works well for me. And so don't feel obligated to stick around. I just appreciate you stopping by. Okay. Guess I want to make sure I'm sharing the correct screen and everything too. Looks correct. Looks like right now we're all looking at my GitHub profile. Hey, Bandana Hawk, how's it going? Trying to fix your own code so you'll be in and out. Oh, awesome. That's really awesome. What are you working on? What technologies? What's the project? I'm absolutely interested in hearing about it. You might have missed it. I'm just trying to make sure I have things set up on my end and just waiting a few minutes before I get started on what we're going to be doing today here. I absolutely can. I need to start remembering to do that, but I always reset it, you know, when I'm doing my typical things for work. So looks like GitHub is good. Let's go ahead, now that you mentioned it. And for those that might be listening and not watching chat, I was asked if I could make the text larger. And I can absolutely do that. I guess I have a bunch of files open from the last thing that we worked on. So let's zoom that in a little bit. That looks good. Now we just need to do the terminal. Dude, I'm so blind. I mean, to be honest, though, I think I've already mentioned this multiple times before, but you know, I am working on a 1440p monitor, which is slightly higher resolution than your standard like 1920 by 1080 resolution, and so that combined with whatever screen you might be watching on is definitely going to make it so that the text just looks absolutely tiny. So don't feel bad. I mean, I have done so much pairing in my career as a developer. And one of the worst things is when I'm on my 13-inch MacBook, which actually I have a 16-inch MacBook now, but when I had a 13-inch MacBook and my pairs would be working on their 4K monitor, it was pretty much impossible to read on my screen. So yeah, don't feel bad at all. This is actually a very common problem with streaming code. Bandana Hawk says, it's a project for my software engineering class. We are building a statistics simulator in Java. Ooh, nice. I've done a little bit with Java, not a whole lot. Shortly after I started playing around with Java, I actually ended up getting a job writing C#. C# and Java, at least at the time, were very similar. It's been a little while since I've touched each of them, but I am a little familiar with Java. I was using it primarily, I used it for two purposes. One was Android development, and another was actually working on some games. I was really interested in some game dev and started getting into that. Who knows? I mean, you know, depending on how this, not today's stream, but just streaming in general goes, I might even try to start opening up that idea of game dev again. We'll see. Okay, so I've got the terminal open here. We've got the Octo project open. I believe we're on the master branch. We are not, actually, so I just left everything exactly as it was. I haven't touched it, actually, since our last stream on Monday. Okay, do a poll just in case I missed like a merge, which I totally did. So boom, it's good to go now. The editor text, I believe, looks okay. I'm actually looking at on my other display, which is my laptop. Looks like things are a bit larger, but if I need to enlarge anything else, just please, say something. I really don't mind. I've got a lot of real estate to work with here. And now that I've got the issues open, yeah, I think we're good to get started. We're at about the 5-minute mark. So on Monday, just a little bit of a recap, what we worked on was we added the ability to duplicate an existing document. So as you know, if you've already seen Octo, or as you might not, it is a writing app for developers. So one of the higher level concepts in the application is the concept of a document, or a note, or whatever you might want to call it, an article. And so it's fairly feature light. I mean, it has quite a bit of features built out, but I'm trying to keep it pretty minimal, and I'm trying to allow the feature set to really emerge as I'm using it and as others are using it and making suggestions themselves. So one feature that we worked on Monday was the ability to, given a document on your screen, actually, let me just run the app. It's always better when we're looking at something rather than just abstractly talking about it. So I'm going to open a new tab and, what is it? Serve dev. Excuse me. Okay, so now that we've got the app running at localhost 8888, we can open it up. And like I said, always better to look at something here. So as a recap, this is the functionality we added, actually, this duplicate button. So when you have a document in context, let's say we click on one and you click the duplicate button, what's going to happen is it is going to take this document. Note the, actually, it's funny, I already duplicated one. Let's just do a new one, a new doc. It's going to take this new document. This is the ID that was assigned when we created it. And when you click duplicate, you'll see that we have a new ID up here because it just took that existing document, created a whole new one, and then inserted that into our state store. So that's what we worked on last time, and this time it's going to be somewhat similar. We're going to work on the concept of being able to merge multiple documents down into one. So I'd say it's loosely similar. It's actually more of an opposite feature set from, say, being able to split a document. So if we had one document and we knew that after 5 lines we wanted to split it into its own document, that might be a feature set one day if I find myself needing it or if other people find themselves needing it. But for now, I think that duplication and merging seem to be fairly important. So the idea is that given one of our list views, we have a list view right here, we'd be able to select at the minimum, be able to select 2 documents and merge those 2 documents down into one. So let's see. Just testing this out again, making sure chat is still working as I expect. Looks like it is. Okay. So let's open this issue and go ahead and cut our new branch. This issue number is 54. So that's how we're going to name our branch. Excuse me. So we're going to check out. This is an alias that I have, by the way. CO is just short for checkout, just slightly shorter to type. Hey, Lakoko, how's it going? Thanks for stopping in. We're going to check out our new branch, and we're going to call it 54 ability to merge documents. Awesome. Now that we've got that branch set up, we can start thinking about what we're actually going to change. And so kind of talking at this at a higher level, similarly to how we did the duplication feature last time, I think we're going to want to think through this a little bit before we actually start writing some code. I'm doing well. Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that you're doing well. Did you stream earlier today? I feel like I saw you online earlier today, but I didn't get a chance to catch it. Yeah, played some Apex. Awesome. Apex is so fun. I'm so excited for Season 7. Who knows? Maybe one day I will play some games on stream. But for now, I think that having a focus on development makes a lot of sense. And then you chilled in Brandboozle's chat for a while. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So in order to merge documents, we can actually kind of look at the code. It just probably won't be changing much right off the bat. It's probably worth looking at our doc model. Now, doing this, we're going to have more than one document in context. But that being said, we kind of have a few like possibilities in terms of how we want to go about merging. We obviously could treat one document as the like permanent placeholder and update that document's content, or if we merge documents, we could just discard the original documents and create one whole new document. So there's a couple reasons that might make sense or might not. It would make sense because it kind of leaves us more of a non-mutated state, where if we needed to, we could always restore the originals. We could go back and restore either the one document or the other, and the merge document would just exist by itself as a new entity. And there are some benefits there. Again, we have that non-mutate. We've got this immutability concept. Oh, tripping over my words here. Which there are definitely benefits there. At the same time, in terms of reconciling data, that does leave us with sort of some artifacts left behind, and I'm just not sure if that necessarily makes sense, right? Also, we lose sort of some of the historic context of our documents, like when it was actually created, right? If we create two documents and then 2 weeks later merge them together, we end up with this new third document which has a creation date of right now. And while we could override that, I think that could be a little bit confusing. So I think for simplicity's sake, I think we're just probably going to let's start with that route. Let's start with the route of creating a new third document. And then we can go from there. If it makes sense, we might change the approach and decide to use one of the documents as a source of truth and just update it. But yeah, I think that would be interesting. So let's just go ahead and see how that goes, at least to start it off. So because we'll be creating a new document, we don't actually need to really have any like mutator or new like methods on the document model itself, because all we're going to be doing is we're going to be grabbing the text from one document, grabbing the text from another document, and then merging those two bodies of text into one in a new document. So this is, now that I think about it, this is going to be a very similar implementation to what we did previously with the duplicate feature. Actually, it might even be a little bit simpler. So in one aspect, in the aspect of actually the creation of the document. So there are some new UI elements though we need to think about. So in this list view here, we need the ability to sort of select a document and not necessarily just open it as soon as we click it. If you notice, if we click here, it opens it up. So maybe let's start there. Maybe let's add some selectable elements. I'm trying to think, maybe a merge button up here. Yeah, let's play around and start getting some ideas. So I'm going to open up the list view here, because regardless, it seems like that's where we're going to be doing some modifications. So I believe that is the document list component. And you'll notice in the document list component, we have sort of two main groups of objects. We have the filter text and filter. So this main group of elements here represents our filter here. So this is our filter box. It allows us to start typing. So if I want to say doc, it's going to reduce the list of things that say doc. If I want to say like 3E, it'll match some of these like little UUIDs in here. So, and then down here, what we have is oh, sorry, I actually misspoke there. So we've got our input, our regex toggle button, and our case sensitivity toggle button. So that would be these here on the right. So do we want to filter by regex or plain text? Do we want to filter by case, meaning if I say a new, and I toggle case on, it's going to match. But if I say a new all caps, it's not going to match anything unless I turn case sensitivity off. So that's all sort of encapsulated in this giant div up here. And then here is where we iterate over all of the documents and we render a document object. So for starters, I guess, maybe adding some sort of like checkbox item to the left of the list would make sense. Or potentially on the right. It seems a little odd. It could be a little bit clunky, so I guess we're going to have to see how that goes. Or maybe just an edit documents button. Let's go ahead and start with that. That seems like it'd be the least intrusive way to go about this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a new div in here. This is just going to be thought of as like a new container between the list of documents and this filtering stuff up here. And in this div, we are going to, let's go ahead and call this a form group as well, because it will contain some buttons or some user interactions. And for now, at least, it's just going to be a button. And this button is going to say something like edit documents. Okay, basic button, no styling applied. So in order to make it look like our other buttons, we need to give it some sort of style. Or some sort of class, rather, since we're using Bootstrap utility classes. So we're going to say class equals btn, which is the default Bootstrap button class. And then button, what would this be? Primary, maybe? So primary is blue. All this really isn't a primary action, so we're going to say button secondary and see how that looks. Okay, that probably makes sense, right? We've got a basic button here that you can click that'll allow you to start modifying these documents. So when we click Edit Documents, what I would expect to happen is instead of clicking on a document, opening that document up, clicking on a document would then select it so that you can perform some sort of action on it. So there is going to be some local state to this lists component that'll keep track of whether or not you have selected edit documents. And I imagine we'll either want to toggle the text here to say something like finish editing, or maybe we'll want a new button that says like merge, for example. And then the text here could change to cancel. Let's do that, something really simple. Let's make it so that when you click on this button, the text here changes and says cancel, so that you can click it to cancel the editing state. And we'll add some text below that button as well. So for now, I'm just going to put it in its own div here. And this text is going to just say something like in the editing state, right? So we are in the editing state. And right now, by default, because this is just HTML we're working on at the moment, this shows up, right, even though I haven't clicked the button. But when we do a little bit of state binding, we're going to see that clicking the Edit Documents button will cause this text to show up, and then clicking Cancel will cause this text to go away. So if we drop down here into our data element, or a data method, I should say, this is the method that allows us to define local state for this component specifically. It's not centralized state in our state store. And so I'm thinking we're just going to have a really simple Boolean here called is editing. By default, it's going to be false, right? You're not editing by default unless you click that button. Excuse me. And so when is editing is true, that's when we would show that text. So that's where right here we're going to say v-if equals is editing, right? And so now you're going to see that the paragraph goes away. But if we change is editing's default value to true, you'll see that the paragraph shows up. So it says we are in the editing state. Now again, false is a better default. It makes more sense. The user probably, when they come to this view, are more than likely just going to be trying to open a document, and editing would be a secondary action. So false is what we'll leave it as for now. So in order to make it so that that button changes based on whether they are editing or not, actually, before we even get to that step, there's actually another piece that uses this same piece of state, right? So the button's text itself is going to change based on whether or not it is editing. So what we're going to say is, I'm trying to think of the best way to go about this. We'll just do a basic like interpolation here. This is a template syntax. It allows you to run some JavaScript inside your HTML here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if is editing, then cancel. Otherwise, edit document. Edit documents. There we go. Let's try that out. So it says edit documents, as we can see there. And now just like manually changing this, let's see. Now it says cancel, and we see that paragraph that says we are in the editing state. Next step is just binding this logic to the button so that when I click it, it actually does something. As you can see, I'm clicking this and nothing's happening because we haven't actually written that logic yet. Excuse me, sorry about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a pretty simple method, not computed, but a normal method. And this method is going to be called toggle is editing, just because that's what it's going to do. This method is going to toggle is editing between true and false. Anytime it's called, it will just swap it. If it's false, it'll make it true. If it's true, it will make it false. So toggle is editing. And it's going to be really straightforward. All we're going to do is say this dot is editing equals not this dot is editing. So this is some basic Boolean logic. We're pretty much just flipping it, saying if it's false, not false is true. So this evaluates to true, right? If it's true, not true is false. So again, for those of you that aren't as familiar with code, like the exclamation point operator typically means not. So it's a Boolean manipulator. And so again, not false is true, not true is false. And so it allows us to flip it very simply like this. Then this is just the functionality itself, but it's not bound to anything. As we did last time, we're going to bind it to a click event on that button. So this should seem a little bit familiar for those of you that were here on Monday. And so we're going to say at click, toggle is editing. So when you click, it's going to call that function. And now, whoops, forgot to change that default back to false. You know, we want it to make sense. So now if I click edit, it says we are in the editing state. If I click cancel, it goes back, and now it allows me to click that edit documents button again. So now we have this little bit of logic tied to this button click, which is what we want, right? Edit documents, cancel edit documents. Boom. Super straightforward and simple for now. Now that we have the ability, now that we can track the state of whether or not we're editing, and now that we have the ability to toggle that state, we're going to go in and we're going to start changing the view or changing the interaction here with these documents, right? Right now, if I click edit and then I click on a document, I would expect that it would allow me to select a document, but that's not what happens. We haven't changed anything yet. So let's see. I think some of that logic actually lives down inside of the document component itself, so we might need to dive down inside of there to take a look. Again, we're iterating over our list of documents and rendering a new document component for each of them. So we already pass in the document parameters here. That's what vbind on an object does. It passes each of the object's properties in as props. We pass in the ID as a key. I'm thinking we'll want a new type of prop that will just say whether or not we are editing. So we will say, we'll just say is, or actually just keep it simple, editing equals is editing. And this may make sense, it may not. We might refactor this a bit here after we get some of this functionality working. But for now, we'll leave it as is. So now in the document component, we're going to have access to this new prop called editing. And actually, we're going to have access to this new prop called editing. So let's open up document itself, the document component, and we're going to define a new prop. the prop here is going to be called editing, and it is a Boolean, right? That's what our is editing state item actually evaluates to, as a Boolean. So using this, it's going to act very similarly to our is editing data property. So it's going to be true or false. It's just a slightly different name, and the way you interact with it is slightly different. Oh, hey, Hannah. Hi, Octo. Hi, chat. Hi, David. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for stopping in. How are you doing? Looks like Tiff actually already beat me to asking that. Just a quick TLDR. We are adding some new functionality. As you may remember, if you were here on Monday, we added a feature for duplicating documents, and so now we are adding a new feature for merging documents back together. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. So this is editing is also going to be bound in each of our document components under the editing prop. So what this means is we can use this editing prop similarly to is editing up above, and we can do something with our HTML to change it so that instead of redirecting us out using a router link, we can do something different, right? So what I'm thinking of is we'll just leave the router link as is, but we could bind another click event here and prevent the browser's default behavior if we're in the editing mode. So let's see. There's a few things we're going to have to do for that. Today is merging day. Got it. Let's merge chat. Awesome. I appreciate the hype. So let's see. I don't want to work too... My brain sometimes goes all over the place. I think about things in like really weird orders, and so I'm really trying to make sure I don't lose everyone by just letting my brain do what it does naturally. And so I'm going to try to like approach these in a more like sensical order as I'm like running through things. Me, in the way that I work, I can very easily just jump around and like, you know, write out some code that isn't implemented yet, and then just kind of shift gears all over the place, and I can lose people that way, and I really don't want to do that to you. So before I bind the click handler, we need to have some basic functionality in this document component as well, right? So when a document is editable, so the editing prop is true, we need to be able to sort of allow a click to highlight this document. So what that really means is we're going to select the document, right? We need the ability to select a document. So given that, I'm trying to think, I guess there's a few ways we can kind of track this state of whether it's selected or not. I don't feel like it makes sense to track in the document model, so we're going to just track it in the document component for now. So we're going to add a new prop called selected, and by default on a document that's going to be false, right? Like documents aren't selected by default, they're just kind of sitting there open. And selected really only applies when we're also editing. So selected is going to be false, and what we're going to do is if editing is true, then when someone clicks on this document, instead of opening the document in a new window, it is going to change the state, the selected state, to be true, right? And then using that, we're going to do something like apply a class so that the border around it changes to like a white border or something. Something just to kind of highlight to the user, to the UI, to say, hey, this item is selected. And we could, of course, do like a checkbox or something, and maybe we'll end up doing that. But for now, at least, I think just either changing the background color or changing the border color will just be sufficient. So let's see. So editing is already passed in. Actually, I put this in the wrong place, so my bad on that. Selected is, it's not a prop, although now that I think about it, yeah, we probably shouldn't make it a prop. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that out into a data method, which I don't think this component actually stores at the moment. So after props, we're going to define a new method called data, and that method is going to return a new object, and the only thing in it right now is going to be selected false. You like the idea of changing to the white border? Cool. Yeah, I usually try to keep like user interaction indicators as minimal as possible. Like, so accessibility is a big concern, right? Like, I don't want someone who has like poor vision or something like that to have a hard time with this application. But unfortunately, accessibility is already going to be a problem with this application. Not to shift gears too far, so I'm only going to just briefly demonstrate this or show this, but assess accessibility is actually one of the issues, because I want to make sure that this app can be used even by someone who's using, say, a screen reader, someone who can't actually see what's going on. And so sometimes you want to make sure, sometimes indicators can be too subtle, and that also can be a problem, but when they're too bold, that is a problem for like your typical user who has no issues with noticing things like that, and it can sometimes even just be distracting, which in itself is kind of another accessibility issue. But let's see. Switching gears back here, so we've got this new data method. It returns a data object selected as false by default, and what we're saying is when editing is true. Okay, so at click, actually here, before I jump up there, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. When editing is true, we're going to change it so that the click handler allows us to, again, prevent the default behavior. Hey, what's up, gaming? How are you doing? Voracious Definator. I like it. Yeah, accessibility is something that a lot of developers overlook, and honestly, I'm guilty of it too, right? This app is not very accessible at the moment, but it is something that I do think about pretty consistently, and something that I care about and would love to do. And, you know, likely it's going to be one of the things that we'll tackle here on stream at some point. So this, in order to change this selected property, we're going to need to add a method that is called when a user clicks this item. And this method is going to, if we're editing, it's going to toggle the selected. But if we're not editing, it's just going to kind of silently be suppressed. It's not going to do anything, right? It's going to let the browser do its default behavior of opening this link, or redirecting the user to this link, I should say. So let's start there. Let's start with adding a method. And we'll just call this onClick. I'll keep these, I guess, alphabetized for now. So we're going to call this onClick. And again, what we're going to say is if this.props.is, or sorry, editing, if this.props.editing, then we're going to do something such as this.selected equals, again, our sort of toggle logic that we implemented before, not this dot selected. So love it. Love all the emotes. Keep them coming. And the other thing we need to do, of course, so what you'll notice now, this might even work. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just add a console.log is selected. And we're going to add one before and after here to show how the value changes and make sure that it changes. But what I would expect here is, because we haven't actually affected the browser's default behavior, it's still going to pop open that document, right? So the last thing we need to do in order for this to be called at all is to bind our router link here at click equals onClick. So again, here's what I expect. I expect this to log that message, but I also expect it to redirect us. So let's go ahead and try that out. Let's open the console here. And what you'll see here is without editing, it shouldn't do anything. We don't see any log message. That's good. But when editing is true, oh, hang on. Invalid prop type check failed for prop editing. Expected Boolean got string with a value is editing. Oh, that's because I forgot to bind this property as an evaluated property. And so it's literally in the document list then passing the string is editing in order to tell a component in you always get them. Here we go. Got someone trying to tell me how to become famous. I mean, Just duel them. I love it. Holy cow, that's awesome. I don't even know. Here we go. I can ban them. So banned. Simple enough. So sorry, we had some random bot in chat posting about how I can become famous. Then again, I might have just ruined my chances. So who knows? But back to the topic here. So when you pass a prop to a component in Vue.js, it assumes that you're passing just like a straight static value, a string. Is editing in this example is what it's getting. You might notice here it says type check failed for prop editing, expected a boolean, which would be true or false, and got a string value is editing. It literally passed is editing in. So that's our problem, right? So all we have to do in Vue to bind a property to an evaluated expression is use colon. So colon editing equals is editing. And that tells Vue that you want to evaluate what's in the quotes as an actual expression. So for me, it's a function. Well, sorry, it's not actually a function. It's a property. And that property is going to be evaluated as true or false. So I was a bad mod. I will be better. No, you're absolutely fine. It was really easy for me to just go in and click and ban them. So don't worry about it at all. Okay, so let's refresh actually now that we're like breaking things and make sure that things work as expected. So we click, it redirects us as expected, right? So now I expect if we click edit and click, it should redirect us still, but we didn't get the log message. So that's interesting. That means that our click event did not actually get triggered. So let's figure out why that is. So in our document component here, @click says on click, class document to document route. Got it. So my guess, and it only happens if we're editing, which I believe, actually I guess we should check that as well, right? So console.log is editing, this.props.editing. There we go. Let's see what the value is. Let's see if that even gets logged. If that doesn't get logged, I do have a hunch as to what could be going wrong here. So we'll click edit and we'll click this link. So that doesn't get logged either. So it's still duck clapping cheeks. I love it. That is wonderful. Like I said, these emotes are wonderful. Let's go back here. So what's happening is the browser's default behavior is actually picking up before JavaScript has a chance to even be evaluated. And because it's redirecting us to a new page, that JavaScript just never gets called. At least that's what it appears is happening to me. So I would imagine the way that we would fix this, although this is going to break our default behavior, is change our @click to, oh, a little bit of a crack there. Change our @click to an @click dot, I want to say prevent. I can't remember if it's prevent. I think prevent is right because we want to prevent the browser's default behavior. .stop is for stopping propagation, which means that something higher in the hierarchy would be listening for that click event. So let's try this out. So if I click, well, that didn't do it. That's for sure. Click.prevent. Click. So click.prevent didn't do it. It didn't actually prevent the browser's default behavior, which is very odd. I wonder if that's because we're using a Vue component. I wonder if router link is just listening. So maybe we actually do need a click.stop, but that seems a little bit odd to me. So I actually want to inspect this element because I might just not be following Vue's built-in behavior as well as I think. Always a good possibility. It looks like it does convert it to an anchor tag, and that anchor tag has an href. So this is default browser behavior. When we click this element, it is using the browser's default behavior. So let's go ahead and just try a .stop as well, and then we can kind of work our way backwards from there to figure out if we need to do something else. Let's see. So click .stop. .prevent, refresh the page here, click, still being redirected. Here we go. This is going to be a fun one. It looks like we have to kind of figure out what's going on. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn to Google here. Very common to have to do. So view router prevent navigation. Not exactly what I'm looking for. This is actually talking about in the router definition itself. That's funny. See an is editing false, similar to what we're using here. Prevent URL change and/or page reload. That's not what I'm looking for either. Oh, before route leave. That would be an interesting use. But you know what? I'm going to change the approach here because I feel like that might be a little bit overkill. So using before route leave is actually a view lifecycle hook. When you have view router implemented, your components actually have a few new hook methods in them. You've got before route enter, before route update, and before route leave. And those are all triggered based on specific actions that are happening. Oh, hang on. So let me just catch up on this. So quick question, do all builds like this start with HTML? If so, how long did the HTML portion take? So this is web development. And so web development in some form or another requires you to use HTML because HTML really is the sort of like structural language of the web. If we want to do something really simple, so let's do this. We can create a new file. I'm just going to show you a demo real fast because it's only going to take a second. Let's create a new file in Octo, and we're going to call it test.html. In this file, we're just going to have a header. So a level 1 header. This is a header, and we're going to have a paragraph. Oops, if I could type here. This is a paragraph, right? And so this is all it takes. This is the language of like the browser. And so this is all it takes to start structuring content in a page. This is telling the browser, I want you to display some text on the page. First, I want you to display this line. And because it's an H1, I want it to be a large header. And next, I want you to display this line. Because it's a paragraph, it has some default CSS that is applied to it. Hence the H1 and P separations here. And so when I take this test.html file and I go into Octo and I say open test.html, boom. That is all it takes for you to write a very, very, very basic web page is HTML. So it's absolutely necessary, although with modern web development, there are many, many, many ways to avoid actually writing HTML itself. And while I'll probably save that for once I start on an introduction to web development series, which again, I really hope to do. I'm feeling really optimistic about that idea. I just wanted to quickly show you, what HTML is used for. HTML is used for structuring content, the text itself. Beyond that, HTML, different types of tags in HTML actually do have default styles, hence the difference in the header the text sizes here. And then that's where CSS comes in. If you want to customize this default HTML, you can change the size, the font type, everything with CSS. And both of those are typically necessary for just about any website out there. Now, those are very static sites. They don't change. There is no user interaction other than the browser's default user interaction, which again, I'm going to save for later. But that's where JavaScript comes in. When you want a dynamic website, when you can really have a lot of custom user interaction and you really want to introduce a true programming language, that's where JavaScript is that's what it's meant for. And JavaScript is obviously a big portion of what we're writing here. So because I'm using a framework which kind of wraps a lot of tools together, this framework called Vue.js, you'll notice that the files that I'm writing typically consist of a portion of HTML, a portion of JavaScript, and a portion of CSS. So I'm going to close that test.html file, and you'll see here, this is our HTML section. This script section down here is our JavaScript, and then below that, we've got our CSS. And so, excuse me, that is because I'm using this framework called Vue. And there are other frameworks that use this sort of template approach, this template file approach. But in a very bare bones, like non-processed website, you don't typically write code exactly like this. CSS is going to be a trip. JS as well. Yeah, I love it. I love web technologies. I'm all about it, and I'm really excited to be able to share that passion here and show things off and like help answer questions. I love it. Keep the questions coming. So before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and just delete that test.html file so I don't accidentally commit it. But going back, right. Okay, so we had an issue where our router, because of default browser behavior, we were exiting the app before I had a chance to run the JS code that we wanted. I mean, really, we were just changing routes, but the component was unmounting and shutting down before our custom code had a chance to run. So here's what I'm thinking. It looks like, excuse me, it looks like the actual, here we go. It looks like maybe we could put our click handler on the div, which wraps around the anchor tag itself. But I'm honestly not sure, just off the top of my head, what the browser is going to do when we do that. So let me change my search real quick just to make sure I'm not kind of going in the wrong direction. I'm going to say JavaScript prevent browser anchor click. So to prevent an anchor from visiting the specified href, you can call the event interface's prevent default method on the anchor's click handle. So I find that interesting, and maybe it's just, again, Vue's sort of framework on top of it, because using click.prevent is what I was trying to do on that Vue router element, but again, I'm not sure. Maybe there's another reason that was failing. So if this doesn't work, then we can change our route here. We can actually change this to a programmatic router navigation. Instead of this converting to an anchor tag with an href, we can just, in our method down below, either select the element or redirect that user programmatically. That I was kind of saving as like a last-ditch effort, but we shall see. So, excuse me. So router link at click stop prevent. I tried multiple, and those did not work. So that's right. Next, we were going to try it on here at click.prevent on click. And if this doesn't work, I think stop propagation kind of goes up the hierarchy, and prevent is more about preventing like current user behavior or going down the hierarchy. So I think prevent is what we want here, if it's going to work at all, right? So click edit, click, same problem. Although, cannot read property editing of undefined. That's actually different. Let's take a look, right? So I said this.props.editing. Why would that? Oh, right. I think in Vue.js you don't actually call props. In Vue.js you might, let's see, what line was that on? Does it say? It doesn't. I'm thinking maybe in Vue.js you just call this.editing. I think it makes it a top level citizen here. So let's start with that and see what happens. Let's go back, click this again. Hey, that did do it. Interesting. So clicking here actually worked, although it didn't prevent the redirection, which maybe that's from the error, maybe it's not. We'll see here in a moment if that's actually possible to prevent the default behavior from this click call above. So let's change this. Let's change this to say this.editing. Boom. And now if I click edit and click this, we should see, yeah, is editing true? Is selected false? Is selected true again? So it was false. We changed it to true, which is what we want. And so then the last thing would be on a click event, there is an event object that is passed along. So we can actually define that event property here, this event parameter. And then I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to try event.prevent default. I'm assuming it's not going to work because I already added the prevent helper here on the click handler, which this is a Vue.js helper, which essentially does what I just did here, but it does it without you having to write the extra code. But we'll see, right? Let's see if it works. I forgot to click is editing, or I forgot to click edit, I should say. And yeah, it didn't work, which again, I didn't exactly expect because the Vue helpers typically work as you would expect them to. And I think what it's really saying is it counts as two separate click events, right? So when I click on, hang on, let me switch back. When I click on this div, it's a separate click event from clicking on this actual router link here. So looks like we're going to have to go with the other approach that I was talking about. So instead of this being a router link, we're going to programmatically redirect based on like what action we want the user to take here. So we're going to remove our click handler up here. We're going to change router link to just be excuse me, a div, just a basic div element now. And we're going to say we don't need a stop or a prevent now because there's no default behavior on a div click. So at click equals on click, and there's no longer a bound to property either. So now nothing should happen when we when we go back here and we click. It doesn't even actually have the proper highlighting because you can see now it doesn't have the cursor as a little hand, which on Mac at least it typically does when you're going to click on a link. Excuse me. So that's something we're going to want to do. I think that's as simple as just saying something like cursor pointer maybe is the proper Bootstrap utility. Oh, that wasn't it. So get Bootstrap, looking at documentation again. Cursor. Not seeing it. So maybe I made my own helper before actually. App.view. Huh. Well, I am going to because utility classes are definitely a bit more helpful here. So we're going to just say cursor pointer, and this is just going to say cursor pointer, which is a CSS element that, or sorry, a CSS style that allows the cursor to change from, well, I'll just show you. So you see what it is. Well, it already updated, but now you can see when I hover over regular text, it makes this little text icon appear for selecting. But with cursor pointer, it looks like it's something that's clickable, which is what we want because it is clickable. So you can see now the is editing on the right hand side, the count is actually going up. Every time I click on this, there's a little counter to the left of the is editing false there, which is totally fine, right? So we click edit, click it again, and now we get our other log statements that we were getting before. So this is good, this is good. Let's go ahead and go back into our document here. And I guess it really is actually the card itself that we want to click on. I didn't realize these were separate classes between the card and the document, so I'm going to move this click handler up a level. And when you click on the card, that's when we want this event to happen. So let's look at that document style actually. So the color changes, this block has a min height padding. Just makes me wonder if we can actually do away with this extra styling that we've got here and apply this document class up here. Let's see what happens. Could break some things, could break the layout a little bit. We'll find out here in a second. It did collapse the layout a little bit. And I'm not exactly sure why. Oh, we lost our updated. How interesting. Why would that be gone? It's just a paragraph inside of this card document. Oh, I think it's because of the card's default stylings. I'd have to go ahead and modify those. I'm not going to mess with those for now. You know, styling isn't exactly the focus that we're doing right now. We're more about the functionality. So we'll just leave it as two separate elements for now, but that could be something worth refactoring. So we've got our click handler on click. We have our base logic already defined here, actually. So if we're editing, we're going to change the selection, right? If we're not editing, we're going to redirect the user to wherever they're trying to go. So we had a method already here called document route that was being used because we had view router being used before, the native view router. But now we're going to be doing this programmatically. So I'm just going to copy that functionality and remove this method here, or this computed property. We don't need it anymore. Document route, just make sure. Yeah, we're good. So now, if we're editing, it should just toggle whether it's selected. And if we're not editing, it should open up the new route. Let's find out. So if we just click it, it opens up. Good, we didn't break existing behavior. If we click edit first and then click it, nothing happens. That's awesome. That's what we expect. If we pop into view here and look at our component's state, let's see, dashboard, content, list, and the first item here, we should see that selected is false, but if I click it, selected is still false maybe? Oh no, it's true, it just didn't update until I clicked on it. So, boom. So our state is now updated and we can toggle documents. Now the next step is, when the selected property is true, we want to add a new CSS class that changes the style with like again, maybe a white border or something. We'll just start with that to keep it simple. So, what are we going to do? We'll do that on the card class, I would say. And this is going to be a dynamic class. So we're going to say colon class, and we're going to be passing in an object. And this object is going to be a class called selected, maybe. And then the value is going to be our data property called selected. So we're going to say selected. So this is saying the key is selected. So the class name, similar to like what we see here, would be selected. That's what gets evaluated. And whether or not selected shows up in our class list is based on this value of the selected data property. Oh, hey, Arn. So Octo is a writing app for developers. It's an open source project that I've been working on for the past like year or so, and I just recently decided to start streaming development of it on Twitch here. So just to give you a brief little visual here, this is Octo. It is a web app. It is a progressive web app. It works on both desktop and mobile. It uses markdown as its language of choice. Let me find a document that actually has some markdown in it. Boom. Oh, I have editing mode here. We're in the middle of developing this, so let me just scroll down. Excuse me. And you can see here that let me get this out of the way. You can see here that we have inline markdown rendering support. And for code blocks, we have like syntax highlighting here. So this is some WebAssembly that I was actually working with someone on back on Saturday. There's another project that I was on someone else's stream for where we were working on an 8-bit WebAssembly game using the WebAssembly text format that you see here. But again, Octo is just a writing app. So the idea here, actually, let me just open up one of my own personal notes here. Here we go. So I like to use this as a demonstration just because to me it really shows off what it's meant for. This is an article that I recently wrote. This is Octo as a progressive web app. So this is actually my production installed version of Octo that I have right now. I had it on my other screen. And this really demonstrates kind of like what Octo looks like when you're writing an entire article in Markdown, right? So you get things like the syntax highlighting for inline links, and these eventually will be condensed and clickable, just features that are missing. You get inline italicized text, inline bolded text, you get different header sizes, syntax highlighting for code blocks, all the things that you might want, right? So, or at least things that I've wanted in a writing app as a developer. And so again, this is what Octo is. On top of just being a basic like writing app, it also takes a slightly different approach for organization. And instead of using folders for organization, you just drop a hashtag or multiple hashtags anywhere in your document, and then you can find that document by scrolling through your list of hashtags here on the left. And so switching my production version out, which has like my personal notes, I can show you here that you can just search for a document. This is what the list view looks like. So, some content, right? This is something that we wrote on Monday, I think. But that is Octo, writing app for developers and an open source project that I've been just really enjoyed working on. So, random question. See, you're using Atom. What are the pros, cons, in your opinion, compared to something like VS Code or WebStorm? So, I don't exactly compare it to something like WebStorm because WebStorm is a full-blown IDE. Although, the line between those concepts of a text editor and IDE is becoming fuzzier and fuzzier, obviously, with text editors being very extendable, especially something like VS Code. But I use Atom because I have used it for a long time. I've heard, I'll get to you, Ian. I've heard good things, really good things about VS Code, and honestly, I've actually started using it a little bit, but I'm just not as comfortable with it yet. I know a lot of the keyboard shortcuts for Atom, and I'm all about shortcuts. Efficiency for me is really important. But the main reason, actually, I started using Atom over VS Code, well, first of all, I think it was out first, but also, it was built by GitHub and maintained by GitHub, and I really wanted to support GitHub. I liked GitHub as an organization. And I still like them as an organization, but the distinction there of like GitHub versus Microsoft is an interesting one now that Microsoft owns GitHub. So I like both of them. I feel like their feature sets are synchronizing quite a bit. And when it comes down to it, I just think, use whatever is the least bit in your way. That's how I feel about a lot of the tools that I use for web development. The idea is to be as efficient as possible and try to keep your tools from interrupting your train of thought. So, Ian, yeah, switch to Apex. I mean, I would love to do some game streaming on here sometime. I think I've already mentioned that before, and I probably will at some point, but not tonight. I don't have the setup for it yet. I am using my MacBook at the moment, and it would just require some prep. And if I do that, I still have not yet decided if I would do it on this account or do a separate account for game streaming. But you obviously know I love Apex, and I would love to stream that too. I'm kidding, though. I'm a good influence, I promise. Jason Web Dev says, main reason I haven't switched to VS Code from WebStorm is the keyboard shortcuts. Yep, exactly, right? Like once you learn them, again, you're just so efficient with it, and it feels very clunky to navigate a tool that you're not used to. So I don't blame you one bit, right? Like the reason I'm actually switching, the reason I've started playing around with switching to VS Code is because I've started pairing with some people using, I forget what the live feature, they have like a live share, I think maybe it's called. But this feature where you can share your terminal, your code, and even a browser server session with someone else remotely without having to do a screen share. And that's a pretty cool feature. So Microsoft does contribute a lot to open source. Yeah, they really do. And like my mindset of Microsoft has changed a lot over the years. I really think they've been heading in a pretty cool direction. And maybe they're not to where everyone wants them to be, but giving them time, I think we're going to see a lot of really awesome, promising things in the community from them. Just go Vim. Yeah, Vim is fun. I use Vim a little bit, but I'm definitely no power user. And yeah, those are just my thoughts on it. Use whatever editor you are happy with. I actually, funny enough, I worked with someone at the last company I worked with who was using Eclipse for Ruby development. And I just found that to be like really funny. But, they knew Eclipse well. They had used it for years, and they just decided to stick with it. So no shame on whatever editor you're using. If you have any more questions about Octo, Arn, and also if I am saying your name wrong, just let me know. But if you have any more questions about it, feel free to ask. Octo is open source. It's on github.com/voraciousdev/octo, spelled exactly the same way as my Twitch username. And actually, there's a link to my GitHub in my Twitch bio. So absolutely feel free to check it out. I would love it if you checked it out, and I would love it if you used it. There's an open source version you can host yourself if you would like, but there's also an online version at octo.app. And the hosted version, octo.app, actually has a Firebase integration where you can sign in with your GitHub account and just automatically get your documents synced across all your devices. And you don't have to, there's no cost to that. You can just sign in and automatically get that functionality. I have not even started considering something like some sort of like paid plan. That's just a feature that currently is costing me nothing. So I want to be able to share it with others too. You know, synchronizing information across devices is pretty huge. So kind of shifting gears back here. Where were we? We have our onClick event. We prevented the browser's default behavior. We said it's selected. Oh, we started with the class, right? So what do we want to do? We can either create a new custom class, or what I was kind of thinking, I was kind of wondering if Bootstrap had some built-in helpers. Let's start with the custom class, just make it really simple for now. And we will just say down here, we will say, I'll put it down after the document, classes here, dot selected is going to add a border that is 0.125 rem solid white. So border size, border type, and color is what this is. Just a single argument for 3 different CSS properties. Let's go ahead and take a look. Let's go back to our list view. That's not the button I thought I hit. And click edit, click a document. Look at that. We've got our border. So beautiful. That is what we want. Click it again, the border's gone. Now there is a slight shift in the content because it didn't have a border before, and now it does have a border when we select it. I don't really like that, so I will be fixing that if we decide to stick with this. But also I think I'm going to go with a one pixel-ish border, so I'm going to drop that down to, we'll just say 0.06, what is that, 0.0675? So 0675 rem. Which gives us a pretty, I think there's definitely still some shifting that's happening here. But you can see now we can select multiple documents like we would expect. So getting a little bit closer. Pretty sure JetBrains IDEs also have a Vim simulation plugin. A lot of them do, actually. So a lot of IDEs and text editors have Vim simulation built in, which is pretty awesome if you're a heavy Vim user and you need to collaborate with someone who is not. Plan on DLing VS Code and Vim plugin this week, and we'll see how it turns out. Yeah, that's awesome. And let me know how it turns out too. I'd love to hear your thoughts about VS Code, and especially using the Vim plugin, because I haven't used Vim plugin with VS Code. I have used it a little bit with Atom. Arn is fine. I would have loved to contribute, but I don't do Vue yet. Yeah, I mean that is awesome. And my other goal here, right, is that hopefully by like watching me kind of work through this, maybe you don't need to know Vue super well just to be able to kind of poke around in this project and know what's going on. And hopefully you'll be able to pick up some things about Vue by watching this, because you know that's what we're doing. We're writing Vue.js, Vue Router, Vuex. Like those are the main pieces of the framework that I have pulled in here. And then also the main text editor itself, the main writing editor, is built on top of a library called CodeMirror, if you're familiar with it. So there's quite a few technologies we're using here, and I really hope that you're able to pick up on some of them just by hanging out. That would be amazing. Yeah, Tailwind is actually one of the things I would love to integrate into Octo at some point. I'm definitely trying to move away from the custom CSS as much as possible and use utility classes where possible. But I'm not quite there yet because I'm using Bootstrap and some utilities are missing, unfortunately. But I agree, Tailwind is amazing, and at some point we're going to definitely be spending some time doing some refactoring to use Tailwind. I'm really considering using Nuxt.js once they finally have Vue 3 support, because right now we're on Vue 2 and I would love to upgrade to Vue 3. And I'm thinking we can just knock it all out. We can upgrade to Vue 3 by using Nuxt.js, and Nuxt.js has Tailwind support by default. So kind of knock them all out at once is my goal once that is released. But Nuxt 3 is not out yet, so I'm just waiting for that. So we've got our selections happening here. This looks pretty good. Another CSS style that we can use actually is the outline property. Outline is interesting because it doesn't actually offset the element. Again, this is kind of hard to see now that there's only 1 pixel, but it is slightly offsetting the text and moving it. And so I'm thinking maybe instead of border being that, we can use outline. I'm not as familiar with outline though, so outline, size, color, etc. Let's see. I don't know if you can actually... Oh, maybe you can. Where's our MDN resource here? It looks like you can use outline around it, so let's go ahead and look for outline itself though. And it looks like it uses the same sort of setup here, so let's go ahead and say just change border to outline and see what happens. Wonderful. So there is one little issue I see, unfortunately, and that little issue would be that it is no longer rounding the corners. I feel like outline usually rounds the corners, and so I'm wondering if maybe that has to do with the card versus document styling that we've got going on here. So let's take a look at that and see what's going on. We've got, here's card, and we've got document. And so card, it looks like maybe card does not have the border radius. But document does? Is that what I'm seeing? Although I'm actually not seeing the border radius style in here. Oh, actually that might be a default style on cards, now that I think about it. Okay, so that is on card itself. So for some reason outline does not actually follow the border radius styling. So let's see if that is something we can do. CSS outline border radius. Outline radius, yeah. Is that even a thing? Excuse me. Ah, right, using a box shadow. That's definitely something I've seen people do as well, as sort of a hack. So, yeah, we could go with the box shadow approach. That's really not a terrible one. I've also used that in the past, and we're not using a box shadow currently. So let's go with that, I guess. Let's try it out and see what we end up with. So box shadow, I think the first is going to be slightly different though. We want 0. We've got the spread and offset. Or sorry, we've got the X and Y offset, and then we've got the spread. 3 point, 2 point. I don't know what point. I'm not as familiar with point actually. But let's go ahead and try 0.125, 0.125 REM, and then white, right? That's what we're going for. Whoops. Forgot to go back in edit mode here. Okay, that's not bad. I think we need to switch back to our 0675, right? Because that's what we were using previously. Yeah, that looks pretty good. We do have the rounding now. Now it's not quite as smooth, it looks like, as using a border. So you know what? I'm just going to swap us back. We're going to use a border for now. And we're just going to give it a default border size, because really what's happening in the whole offset problem is caused because there is no border, and when you add a border, it actually does change the box model of the element. So we're going to go ahead and add a border. We're going to do the 0675 solid white, right? So we've got part of it. Boom. Yeah, it looks a little bit smoother, I'd say. Like, it's not too different, but it is slightly noticeable to me. So that looks good. And we just need to give it a default border now. Same size, but a transparent color. So, excuse me. Selected is on the card item itself, and I think, again, talking about Bootstrap utilities, this is just another one that I'm not as familiar with. I'm going to look it up. I know there's a border utility, so here we go. And I think just border default is probably what we want. But the question is, how do we do transparent? And is there a transparent one? So yeah, we keep coming back to this idea that just once we do switch to Tailwind, it is going to be nice. Let's go ahead and just add border and see what happens. So, okay. So it adds a border as we would expect by the looks of it. Actually, interestingly enough, that's actually the border that we want, and it doesn't even need change. So we're going to be able to remove some custom CSS. That's pretty awesome. But before we do that, let's figure out how we can add a border with a transparent background. So Bootstrap transparent border. I'm probably going to have to use, yeah, I don't think there's like a default Bootstrap utility that has a transparent border, unfortunately, because that is, it's really what we want. We want a transparent border, and we just want to change the color. That way the box model isn't changed and it isn't offset. So let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to say border, border. Actually, what was that utility? Let's open that back up. Border color. Primary, secondary. Light, dark, and white. Yeah, but we don't actually have something outside of that. Okay. I mean, I guess unfortunately we're going to have some custom CSS still. I'm going to add a new utility class because, again, I feel like utility classes are more helpful than adding a bunch of just like custom stylings to every component that needs it. So we're going to call this border transparent. And then border white is what we'll end up with. So let's go ahead and do, we've got border border transparent. Let's go to our app view, which is where we're currently storing all of our utility helpers. And we've got border color transparent. Okay, simple enough. Let's see what we're working with now. Whoops, document. Looks like we still have that white color, so let's figure out why. If we go back up to card, we'll see, oh, that's why, because border actually adds it with an important flag. Of course it does. That's one issue that I have with Bootstrap utility classes, is that most of them do add the important flag, which can be really hard to work around. So I guess we have to use the important flag as well in our border transparent utility. So let's hop back over to app, add the important flag. The important flag, by the way, pretty much, like for those of you that don't know, is a declaration on a CSS assignment that says, hey, you can ignore precedence. Just trust us, this is the style we want, no matter if it's like the highest precedent item or not. And you can, of course, still run into a precedence issue if you have multiple items that have the important flag applied, and that's why it's kind of not always a great idea to use it, but it does have its purpose. So, well, that looks better. And so what we're going to end up changing here, because the default is the border that we want, but by default we don't want that border, all we're going to change here is we can get rid of selected and just say add border transparent, right? So add border transparent if it's not selected. Otherwise, let it do the default styling, which is just a basic border that is white. And now we can get rid of our custom CSS right here. So let's see, we refresh the page. Again, test our functionality. We click, it works as expected. We click edit, we click one, boom, the border changes to white, changes back. There is no text offset. So I think we're good. This is coming together. We have the ability now to select multiple documents. One thing, well, yeah, let's leave it at that. So we can select multiple documents now. Let's just say I select these three, click cancel. So there's a problem. The selected status itself does not actually get applied. So what should we do here? I guess this is actually a good case for changing the hierarchy a little bit. So currently a lot of this logic is encapsulated in the document itself, and I think whether or not it's selected should be in the document. But the whole editing workflow and keeping track of whether or not a document is being edited, or you're going to be editing a document like this, I actually think we can keep track of at a higher level. And even when you click on a document component and decide that you want it to pop it open in the browser. So what I'm thinking is we're actually going to move some of our functionality out of the document component into the document list component. And from there, that's going to give us the flexibility of determining, well, first of all, it's going to allow us to clear all of the selections as soon as we're done editing. And second of all, it's going to keep the context of which ones are selected in the document list component, which makes a bit more sense for the purposes that we're using here. So the selected piece can stay the same. We're going to move selected. It's no longer going to be a data element. It is going to be a prop. Editing itself, we don't need anymore. So whether or not it's selected now that it's a prop means that this logic is actually not necessary either. We're going to just pull that out. And we don't need the click handler now. Now the document is just a static component. It doesn't really do anything, except for the, of course, like discardable action that's already built in. Because that affects one document only at a time, I think it makes sense for it to still live inside of here. In the document list component now, we're going to move this method, except instead of calling it onClick, we're going to call it based on the action. We're going to call it something like select document. Yeah, let's start with that. If this dot is editing, then select the document. Whoops. Otherwise we will push it to the router. That makes sense to me. So this is going to be slightly different. We're going to be doing like a dynamic click bind event to each document from the list view now. And so what that means is it is an iterated object, and we're going to be adding an @click handler. So @click, we're going to, I'm thinking this would be a use case for passing the ID in actually. So let's see, let's think about this. We need to store this selected state on the document somehow on each individual document. And while we could do it in the component, we could also do it here in a new array. Now I'm starting to wonder whether or not it makes sense for the document model to keep track of this. I'm still thinking no. I think really what we need is some sort of like decorator around a document. But for now, let's start with this, and we'll say when you click call select document and pass in the ID, document.id, right? So got an ES6 arrow function here that calls a function and passes a property that is in context on each iteration. So the document ID itself, which tells us what document we're clicking on. Very important, of course. Instead of editing, we have selected, right? That's our prop that we're passing in. And we're going to say something like document.selected. We are going to go ahead and add like a very basic sort of document decorator in here, since we're adding sort of state or functionality to our document object that doesn't actually apply to the model itself. So, oh, what does that mean? Oh, hey, Misty, how's it going? I'm just writing this message to say I hope you're having a wonderful stream. I've been lurking the whole time playing Apex. It's very above my head, is this chat. Well, I appreciate you lurking. I appreciate you just hanging out. It's really awesome that you're, or even just listening. You know, I can ramble on a bit, and I do enjoy sort of talking out loud as I'm doing this, actually, and this is something I'm just now discovering because I've never really done something like this. I have paired with people before, but it makes me sort of stop and like think about what I'm doing and make me wonder, like, you know, does this approach make sense? Could I be doing this better? And I think that's something that you just don't really think as much about when you're kind of heads down working on something. Also, let's be incredibly attractive. People play Apex together sometime soon. Also Among Us the other night with you two. So much fun. Agreed. That was so much fun. And also agreed, we absolutely need to play Apex. All right, so, excuse me. So what do we need to do? We need to decorate our document objects. We have a list of documents. We already have a filtered document, so I guess we could create a new one called decorated documents. So let's go ahead and do that. Decorated documents is just going to return, whoops, my bad. It's going to return, what is it going to return? I guess we could just explode our document into a hash. Thirsty, yeah, I am. By the way, I ordered a giant water jug off of Amazon yesterday after seeing yours. That's awesome. I highly recommend it. I've been loving it. I haven't had it that long, but I've been absolutely loving it. So, for the purposes of displaying the object and binding it to the document, we are sort of going to be destructuring our doc model, but I think that's okay. In this context, I think it makes sense. And so what that means is we're going to have a hash here that we're returning, and this new hash is going to have all of the, whoops, sorry, we're mapping, and then we'll be returning a new hash. So we're going to say this dot filtered documents dot map. So we're returning the mapped list, and we're going to say doc, and it's going to be, actually I can use an even more expressive syntax here. It's going to be a hash where we first, oh, keep accidentally this keyboard. We're going to expand the doc, and then we're going to add a value to it called selected. Hang on. The problem is this is a computed property, so this doesn't actually work. We kind of need a new class. Can't wait to play Phasmo. That game is so wonderful. I'm kind of thinking now maybe we need a new class to represent our document object, but I just don't know how I feel about that either. So what we have here, we have an array of documents, and what we need is we need an array of the same documents, but we need to store some extra data alongside them. Hmm. I guess for now, I really don't know how I feel about this approach. It honestly feels it feels a little dirty to me to say like shove a new property into the doc model called selected, because to me that seems really contextual. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense, in my opinion, to do that. So let's think about this. I guess we could maintain a separate list of document IDs and whether or not they're selected. That also doesn't seem very clean, but for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and go that approach, and kind of let my mind like think on this a little bit, because I'm not 100% sure. Sorry, I need to disable my notification to keep getting alerted over here. There we go. That's better. Okay, so we've got our filtered documents list. We want to, when they select an item in the list, actually, you know what? Now I'm wondering if we should just use a ref, keeping everyone safe. Sorry, my mind right now is just blanking a little bit, but if we want to keep track of a similar list with a different level of state, yeah, man, everything I'm thinking of just doesn't seem very clean. So I guess if anyone has any suggestions along the way, I'd be happy to hear them. For now, I'm going to keep working through, I guess, like the least intrusive approach that I can think of, which isn't great because this doesn't seem very good to me right now, but we'll go with it. So we will call this decorated, actually selected. Here we go. I have an idea. We'll just keep track of the selected document IDs. That, I think, would make a lot more sense. So we will say selected documents, and that's going to be an array. Excuse me. And so what we're going to do is anytime, yeah, here we go. Anytime we select one, we will just push it into that array. And this could be the entire document or just selected document IDs. I'm not really sure what I want to do yet. We'll figure that out here in a minute. But selected documents is going to tell us which ones are selected, because when we click, it's going to push a document into that array, or it's going to pop it out. And so, awesome. Yeah, I think that is going to make sense. And so now selected here, we can just pretty much say is selected is a method, and we pass document.id into it. That'll tell us whether or not it is selected. So let's add another method down below here. Is selected. And that's going to get an ID. And we're just going to say this dot selected documents dot find doc.id is equal to ID. Oh, whoops. There we go. I think that'll do it. So this will just say it will either return, I think, like undefined or null if it doesn't find anything. We can go ahead and coerce it to a Boolean here with a double not. But if it does find something in the selected list, then it will return true. I think that's what we want. Okay, so is selected. We'll find out. I'm also curious if that's going to force a re-render. So that looks good. selected is selected, looks good. That adds the class that we would expect. Select document is going to push into the list or pop it out of the list. Calling it a night. Hope you all have a good one. Keep up the awesome work, Dev. Yeah, thank you, Gaming. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you stopping by. Like, absolutely. I'm definitely starting to feel pretty exhausted today, I think. So I'm probably going to be calling the stream here around like 11 or so, unless I get like a second wind, but I'm really starting to feel it. But again, thank you for stopping in. It's been awesome. All right. So select document receives an ID, and what do? We say, excuse me. We say if this dot selected documents dot find, very similar method check here, doc.id is equal to ID. Then if it's already in the list, then we want to pop it out of the list, right? We say this dot selected documents equals this dot selected documents dot filter doc. Doc.id is not equal to ID. That'll give us everything where it's not that document. And if it's not in the list, then we want to do this dot selected documents dot push. Actually, I guess we need this in so first we find it. Oh, right, we need to find it here as well. So this would be this dot filtered documents dot find. Guess we need this either way, right? So this dot filtered documents dot find doc.id is equal to ID. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And then I think the rest of this is, oh, we still do need our is editing logic around this. So, oops. That was a bit, but we'll see how that goes. Looks like I accidentally have a hash here too, though. Okay, let's try that out. So, looks like, oh, I forgot to get rid of that. Here we go. Forgot to get rid of decorated documents. We definitely don't need that now. Let's see our console. So clicking it does nothing, which is because, let's take a look. If this dot is editing, then we toggle documents. Otherwise, this dot router dot push, that needs to be just ID instead of this dot ID. That's still not working. Okay, so @click is a function that calls select document and it passes in the document ID. Interesting. I wonder if this is having an issue because of the seems to be rendering fine, however. All right. I'll tell you what. I'm really starting to feel pretty exhausted. So I think I might actually just call it for the evening. My brain is definitely not functioning as well as it should. It's probably due to some lack of sleep, but I think it'd be better just to call this and save this for the next one. You know, we're getting pretty close to the end of the stream anyway. I will think on this some more. I'll leave it in its current state, actually. We'll probably just pick it back up. But I think this is probably a good stopping place. I could maybe work through the problem and come up with a worse solution, just with how I'm feeling. But I think that regardless, we're going to be kind of in the middle of this implementation. We're just about at that 2-hour mark. So yeah, thank you everyone for stopping in. Thank you to everyone who kind of like hung out and asking questions and everything. I really appreciate it. If you are interested in this, feel free to follow me on here. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter. I usually post on Twitter when I'm going to be going live. I also like to just post other various tech-related or gaming-related things on Twitter. And yeah, hopefully I'll catch you next time. See y'all later.